Hello everyone, my name's Duncan White. I'm the group editor with International Fire and Safety Journal. I'm delighted today to be joined by the team from FLAIM. With me is James Mullins, CTO and founding researcher. I've also got Evan Wing, Director of Business Development, and my old friend Ted O'Brien, Customer Services Director for UK and Ireland. Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Hey Duncan, thanks for having us.
Afternoon, Duncan.
Afternoon, Duncan.
It's always a pleasure. It's nice to be catching up again. We seem to be coming to the end of a year where we've crossed paths on many sides of the pond and at many shows, and it's nice to be able to sit down now and just consolidate some of what I've seen and what I've learned, and it gives me the opportunity to put you guys on the spot and ask some questions that I didn't have time to ask at the time. Ted, I'm going to come to you first. I know that we share 30 years plus each in the fire and rescue service, in various fire and rescue services across the UK. And the whole issue of training, we could sit down and spend a whole day discussing training and what it was like when we joined and what it's like now. But I think what is worth bearing in mind when we're having these discussions is the pressures that are placed on modern fire and rescue services, in terms of the roles that they now have to undertake. It's back in our day when it was chip pans and chimneys and alarms, and we were in and out the doors all the time. On-the-job training was a lot more prevalent, and we were also given plenty of time to carry out realistic training. That's not the case now. So, in a nutshell, kick us off. Where does VR come into training for the modern firefighter?
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. It's a really interesting question, and I don't think I've got the answer. I've got a version, my version of where I think it fits in. I think what we're seeing across certainly the UK, but speaking to colleagues, I think this is a worldwide position in that the number of incidents have been driven down quite drastically, and that's great for the members of the public that we serve, and for our organisations in terms of the prevention work that they've done. But what that actually means now is that there is less real exposure to those operational incidents, which makes training vitally important. We know that fire and rescue services have a wide range of operational policies and procedures, and therefore a training requirement for those organisations to prepare their operational crews for those foreseeable events. And I think where VR fits in perfectly well now is that many of those types of incidents that fire and rescue services are responsible for responding to, we can actually place them in a virtual environment and allow them to test their capabilities against those events in a way that they've never ever been able to do before. So what I mean by that is, we know that there's still the requirement for the art of wearing breathing apparatus and the understanding of fire science. But what about putting somebody on an aircraft where there's an incident now taking place, or on a ship, or a running fuel fire, or a moorland fire, all those risks that are now very prevalent and very visual to us on a day-to-day basis when you're still close to the sector. We have that ability now to put people in that virtual environment and walk and talk through a policy and a procedural approach to dealing with that incident.
Yeah, and again, that ability to walk and talk through is what you've not got the time to do when you're doing it for real. James, I'm going to bring you in now. I think that as a third generation firefighter, you've got some huge credibility behind you when you've put together a product based on that experiential understanding of the role. I've seen many of the scenarios. I think that from what I can see, 120 plus and counting scenarios that are available there for use by fire and rescue services that use this product or are thinking about using this product. Ted quite rightly touched on there about the ability that VR gives the modern fire and rescue commander the tools to teach everybody from the first day firefighter up to the 30-year firefighter that's only 6 months from retiring. It's that ability to provide the same level of training, that same consistency, which looking at what you guys do means that you've got the same scenario for everyone that you can't possibly replicate if you were doing it for real. Explain a little bit more to us how that idea came around.
The development of FLAIM Systems technology about 5 years ago now. I was working at university in the robotics space, working with defence, and I could see what was happening in the military training space, particularly in the active shooter, long arm shooting training space. And I thought this was about the period in Australia where we were shutting down a lot of our hot fire training grounds due to PFOS, PFOA, contamination of groundwater and facilities. And I thought, why couldn't we create something in the digital world to create more realism in our training? And for me, it was all about kinesthetic learning. We talk about kinesthetic learning a little bit more than virtual reality, to be honest, because I think a lot of people have had some pretty poor experiences with virtual reality in the past. They've used very early generation technology. And I think that colours people's perspective of what the technology can achieve. And what we're really trying to achieve is to put you in a location and give you a number of stresses and see how you behave and allow you to fail safely in a safe environment. And fundamentally, that's it. We originally spoke about it being in a training ground in a box, I guess, that could travel around to a fire station or to a firehouse to be set up in a few minutes and allow you to train in an environment. And while we said before about over 120 different training scenarios, it's really 120 training environments that allow you as an instructor or as a trainer to train your people how you see fit. You can put as much colour into the scenario as you like around what the exposures are, what the risks are, what the alleged incident is, and allow people to make mistakes, as I said, safely. We can introduce things like structural collapse. We can do things that are very, very hard to do on the traditional training ground. But having said that, it's certainly and definitely not designed to replace existing hot fire training grounds, as I think Ted mentioned. It's a tool in the toolbox, and we're really getting a lot of buy-in from fire services around the world, and I think we're in 47 countries now. And that buy-in really is driving the next generation of our software development, and we've got a team of software developers that have put over 70,000 hours, I think, now into the development of our fire sciences and our environments. And we continue to improve based on the feedback of our customers and our clients around the world.
I think I'm going to pick up there on one thing you've just talked about is the feedback of customers around the world. Many organizations within the fire sector that I've had the privilege and not privilege of working with fail to take on board what the end user is saying. And to me, the success of any product is the success is based around what the end user says about it. They're your best advertising tool. They're your best people to give that feedback to others. And I've always said to clients I work with, if you can give the names of customers to potential new customers to go and talk to, that they're the ones that are going to sell it for you. And by using that and taking that feedback and the 70,000 hours of input by your designers has provided you with that 120 plus scenarios. Having been a hot fire trainer and knowing how long it takes to set up just one scenario, and then if somebody doesn't make that day, you've got to try and recreate that because they've got to do it again, and to get their tick in the box. This just makes it a lot more cost effective. We need to get across the message that it's not here to replace effective hot fire and hands-on training. It's here to provide the additional tools to allow it to be done safely in an environment. Evan, I'm going to bring you in now, my friend, and to comment on what you've heard so far.
Yeah, no, thanks, Duncan. And I think, one thing just to continue to add to what we were talking about is I think this system is really there to train the mind, right? James said it at the end, right? It's not to replace live fire, but we're training the critical thinking skills of the instructors, of the trainees, And I think that's where, the feedback that we just talked about, it's critical that we get it from the instructors and from the users, because roughly semi-annual, 2 times a year-ish, we do a software release. And that's either more scenarios, which we've kind of said, let's go back into the sim system. Let's make things more realistic. Let's take feedback from the users and incorporate that. Because everyone always asks, like, hey, can we get feedback? And we're like, absolutely. I've heard this, we want partners, not customers. And that may sound a little cliche, but it's true, because all of those crossing T's and dotting I's really make it into the system. And I think that's something good for our users, where there's we're looking for loyalty as much as we're loyal to our customers. We want people to see the product progressing over time. So I think that's an extremely important part of it. But just to comment on a couple of things earlier as well, James talked about creating stress in the brain. This system, while we have the kinesthetics, while we have the haptics, the heat vest, the nozzle reaction force, like that's all impressive and very cool. But I think that's where people thought we were trying to replace live fire. But all those tools really is they further cement your mind and thinking that you're in that scenario. So we're doing role play like every other promotional exam that's been out there, throwing what if scenarios at you. But now you can't see your peers watching you. And so you're almost in this, well, you're not almost, you're in a very distraction-free zone, where now it's your brain coming up with, all right, what's your radio traffic? What are my communication skills? And I think that really is what trainer is doing. The nozzle reaction force is not supposed to simulate stretching a line. It's just supposed to be something else for you to think about while your brain is under extreme stress. And if I could, I think just one of the last things that I think this tool really does, and this took us, I think, a few years to really figure out, because initially we gave this blank canvas of, hey, this is a virtual environment where you're able to train, like someone said, 150 plus environments, right, with variables and things to make things go not necessarily sideways, but just variables to keep the training fresh. But we've also realized that this is a fantastic tool to help the current leadership. And I'm going to get generational for a second. So think about a Gen X leader that is having troubles communicating with a millennial who's going to be the next round of leadership, who's also trying to communicate with a Gen Z. And we're also trying to recruit Gen Alpha coming in. Is that nobody, and there's still textbooks that are important to have, but this is a way for people to meet that next generation in a medium that they're used to. So we're also teaching people how to communicate with those other generations, where I always joke that I'm a half millennial, right? I was born in 81. So I'm like a young Xer, but a super old millennial. And I think that that's something where this is just almost like a Tower of Babel, and we're trying to get people to simulate and train together. So kind of a long soapbox, but it felt good. So there we go.
It's there's nothing wrong every now and again, Evan, of getting on that soapbox. Ted, I'm going to come back to you now to bring some more in relation to what I'd like to hear there in relation to the leaderships and looking at the next generation. You and I went through promotion and all the processes with that, where we were reliant on the ability of crews that were acting on our behalf to do the best they could for us. One of the things I always found difficult to understand was that there was no consistency, there was no level playing field. Whereas if we're using this type of technology to work with fire and rescue potential new leaders to show what they can and can't do, we know we can set the same parameters time and again to ensure that everybody's getting a level playing field. Give us some more about that, Ted.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. It's a really interesting point. I think that the one thing that the immersive learning environment brings is absolute consistency. So there is no variances in terms of what people are exposed to. We can create that level playing field so that people get the same experience, the same exposure, and you're not relying on other people's behaviors to see whether this is going to be a good or a bad day for you in those processes. I mean, if we think back to, as head of operational training for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service in my latter years, where there was a requirement for me to, ensure that the organisation ran a couple of 10 appliance exercises a year followed by one 20 pump exercise every year, and then one 30 pump exercise every 2 years. The reality was that just a small handful of people were actually getting any benefit out of the whole exercise, and it was a huge cost, huge amount of planning and preparation for it. But the reality was that 30 people were doing a little bit of pump operating or and breathing apparatus where we're getting another breathing apparatus where. But then you had your sector commanders and your functional officers, your ops commander and your incident commander were the ones that were under scrutiny. So actually, there may have been 100 people on the incident ground, but there was only 2 or 3 people who were being assessed or observed in terms of how they performed on the day. When we started to introduce things like simulation software, where with just a small handful of role players, we could put people under that same kind of pressure or experience, then people started to become really immersed in that environment. What we're seeing now with Flame Trainer is that we can put people in the exact same environment. They may make different decisions, and that's fine, but the data that's captured out the back of that performance starts to give us a really rich data source of how people have performed. And I always love the experience when you can say to somebody, so how do you think that went? And if we go back 20 years or plus, there would be an argument that would break out to say, oh, well, I definitely did that. And I remember that I definitely asked for more resources and I definitely sent that message. And we go, no, you actually didn't do that. And the reality was that they thought about doing it, but they're not actually actioned it because there is just so much going on and there's that information overload. In this environment now, as James mentioned earlier, we can stop and pause and have a conversation, and the people in the room can also get involved in that discussion and that debate. And if us 4 people now are watching the same thing, we could actually just have a discussion about, Duncan, what does that mean to you? Have you seen something like that before? What decisions did you make when you do it? And we can play that through, and we can do it in such an environment that I think is a much richer learning environment than anything that I've ever been exposed to in 36, 37 years in the fire sector.
Having the ability to review, and like you say, you think you've done something, but unless you can actually prove that you've done it, then it's very difficult, and you're going to end up arguing black is white. And having it there as a record and transparency for an organization when you're looking at especially when you're looking at putting in place control measures to ensure that people have been given the correct tools to do their job. If you've got the evidence to show the roadmap that they've been through during the acquisition phase, the revision phase, etc., it makes me smile when we go back to the old days of the 20 plus pump exercises and 30 plus and the old HMI inspections. It's laughable now to think that a brigade was judged on how just maybe a fifth of its workforce performed on one afternoon or evening based on a scenario, rather than looking at how the whole workforce performed over the whole year. But thankfully, we're beyond that now, and we're seeing technology coming in to provide us with that transparency. James, I'm going to come back to you now. I think the use of technology, a lot of I wrote in the October issue of International Fire and Safety Journal about where people still allow tradition to get in the way of innovation, and where there's a need for innovation and tradition to work hand in hand, but not for the sacrifice of safety. You're pushing technology and the boundaries of technology to enhance firefighter safety. Where do you see Flame taking that in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, great question, Duncan. And I guess from my perspective, we're really not trying to push the technology as such. We're trying to push the opportunity for learning in a safe environment. As I mentioned before, we've been simulating fires for quite some time now in order to make them a little safer, a little less carcinogenic, but still get valid learning outcomes. I guess in the future, where I hope to see this technology move is into the firehouse itself. At the moment, we have a number of services around the world that use these and push these out or bring people in to train them. This technology really adds value when we can commoditize it and really get it out into the services so that they can use it more regularly, because skills fade is huge in our organisation, in many organisations around the world. And we may or may not necessarily know that we have skills fade as individuals until we're placed under pressure. So, if we can capture and analyse that data and feed that back to the organisation and say, well, look, we're starting to see a little bit of a drop-off in this particular skill set, in this particular demographic, we can fix that. And that's what a good trainer and assessor does now on the hot fire training ground. But giving them the tools to do this more broadly across the organisation, a good instructor can train, 10 people a day or 100 people a week or however many you can get through. But imagine if we could have the best instructors in the world running through firefighters in their millions all around the world. This is the kind of technology that can enable that. So you could sign up for a course and have a hot fire instructor in the UK providing training to a recruit firefighter course here in Australia. And that's what our work towards teams and teams training is enabling. We can put people in the same location. And at the fire services show recently, I was lucky enough to be in the system. We had Ted, we had Paul Spate, we had Jacob Nabali, one of our US team in there, and I was in Australia. And we were all working the same fire. And certainly there was some communications challenges from a taxonomy perspective. We didn't all necessarily talk the same, but we all understood the problem that we had in front of us. And that's something that I think is going to be really, really interesting moving forward. We can all share our ideas more effectively if we're all standing around the same fire in the same environment. I was reminded recently that we spoke to someone in the Navy, and Evan will be able to back this up, but the Bonhomme Richard lost the US Navy lost a fairly significant warship a couple of years ago in San Diego Harbor. And the report really discussed the communications challenges between the naval firefighting services and the civilian firefighting forces. And that's in the same country, speaking the same language and so forth. So you can imagine if, we had a US Navy ship anywhere else in the world in a foreign-speaking location, how the interoperability would work. So how do we train people in advance for those very, very high risk, very, very low incident events? And this is, I think, where this technology can go so that we can start to do that interoperability training. You could work with your mutual aid or your neighbouring fire services, and it could be, snowing outside, and you could be training for wildfire or bushfire or brush fire. That's kind of where we want to get to, Duncan, to prepare for the what if.
Yes, I totally agree. I think that ability to train firefighters across the world for an incident that may happen once in a lifetime when something comes into their area is invaluable. Evan, I'm going to come to you to follow up with that, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And I think if we take what we're doing right now, if you look at this podcast, we've got people in the UK, Australia, and the US, right? And we've all heard about AUKUS and the future submarine development, right? And so to James's point about Navy, we are literally looking down the road of a submarine that'll be operated and manufactured by 3 of these, allies. And I think, to James' point, as he started to talk about multi-user as well, let's look at what the evolution of Trainer was, of FLAIM in general, right? Single user system, giving immediate feedback. For us in the US, we're always taught not to slam the bail shut. So, no water hammer. But if you water hammer in VR, you're going to carry that trait over into the real world, right? Now it's evolved into multi-user, right? And so what what James mentioned, and Ted was on that. And I just did a scenario where we had someone in California, myself in Wisconsin, and two people in Maryland. So getting in this and kind of going back to the ability to communicate across generations, but also communicate. James said about mutual aid districts. I think if we really look, we're going to perfect, and we've already done a really good job of making this multi-user 6 jobs with someone who's kind of invisible just on observation, right? But now we're starting to coordinate different companies or different job roles within one team. So as we look to scale that, and I think some of the other larger agencies that are looking at FLAIM as a communications tool, right? Because to come in and to have, we still see a lot of use in the hose reel and everything else in the heat suit, but there's also this introducing technology in bite-sized amounts to get people used to it, right? So a command and control multi-user product where communications with intercompany communications, that's going to be key, and that's going to make people give better first in reports, better, more succinct traffic, when they're inside operating and communicating back what they're seeing, maydays, all these different types of communication reports that we cannot practice enough in the right environments. But let's think about mass casualty, right? Let's look back at some of the terrorist attacks. That and then Hurricane Katrina were really, I think, the basis for the National Incident Management System. So the ability to communicate. I think our scope will eventually be able to have other jurisdictions, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's EMS and fire all together, but we're going to practice working on these bigger what if disaster scenarios. And I think that's kind of where I look to the future, as well as all these other products that we're innovating that we can't necessarily talk about, but we take real world tools and put them into VR so that you have a better practice before you go and hit the live fire training ground. Your communication, your fundamentals are maybe a little bit more sound than day 2 on the job when you're going to the burn can. So I just think the incidents are going to get bigger and people are going to be able to train and communicate more efficiently. So.
Yeah, valid points, every one of them. It was interesting, James. I was stood in the audience at the Immersive Services show and watched the exercise unfold between Australia and our old friend Paul Spate was there as well, and it was great to see. Ted was like the ringmaster there, bringing it all together and ensuring everything worked out perfectly. Before I forget, I'm just going to throw in here that listeners, if you want to know more, you want to learn more, then flamesystems.com is the website you need to be going to. Ted, sum up for me what VR brings to the modern firefighter, but also to the firefighter that's in the last quarter of their career.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's probably a couple of aspects or a couple of different responses to the question, Duncan, in all honesty. One is that Evan has already touched on the different generations that we've got coming through. And I think that as organizations start to think about themselves as an employer of choice, we're going to have a generation of people coming through hopefully into the fire sector now, where they will see it as a long-term career choice for themselves, where they will have been exposed to the utilization of technology and immersive learning through their journey through education, through schools, colleges, and universities. And I think the fire sector can't continue to say, oh, well, that's not the way we do things here. We've always done it this way. So I think as an attraction strategy for organizations, they are going to have to think very carefully about what training looks like for people, because younger people coming into organizations now will be wired and will have learned how to learn in a certain way. So therefore, to be an employer of choice, I think we need to think about those people. In terms of the other end of the scale, Duncan, when we talk about somebody becoming an expert in something, and I think most people know this equation of around 10,000 hours worth of repetition to become a master of something. I just did some quick sums before we came online, and certainly in the UK, most fire and rescue services for a career firefighter will do around 8 hours worth of dedicated time towards training per tour. So 3 hours training during a day shift, a couple of hours during a night shift, if they're lucky. And the quality of the training and the facilities they've got are obviously different up and down the country. But if we take that and take it over a year, it's just over 300 hours worth of training. And what we need to think about is are they getting the best training they could possibly get? So when I think about breathing apparatus training and we talk about compartment fire behavior training, when we did the stuff in the hot counties, we all know it was great. We all loved it. We know it's where the most risk was, and we know it's where we were getting the most exposure to carcinogenics and probably the most harmful of training. But it was required, and we needed to know what that was. But the other 98% of breathing apparatus training I did was obscuration mask bumping around a locker room, or doing, the Ministry of Silly Walks in a building if we were lucky enough to get into a local commercial property. James mentioned it before about it's always about simulation in the immersive world. So going back to the longer career firefighter now, we can actually take people through some traditional style of training where they take the knowledge and understanding aspect of whatever it is that we're talking about, and then we can allow them to practice it time and time and time again in a safe environment, even allowing people to make mistakes in a safe environment and talk about that. So I know the team have spoken about what we did at the Emergency Services Show, and we absolutely were showing off the extremities of somebody in Australia being mobilised to the same residential property fire with persons reported than a team in the UK. But actually, if we think about it on a slightly smaller scale, any fire and rescue service in any country, when they start to think about their geographical area and how widespread their stations are and their staff are, this is an opportunity. So the question we start to ask organizations now is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And if we think about any organization that might have 10, 15, 20, 30 stations, we could have this equipment at those stations where a central trainer can deliver a consistent, standardized lesson to 30 different stations, 30 different groups of people, allow them all to experience the same learning environment, and then capture that data that would give an organization a really rich source of information around where people are falling down. So, people are forgetting to check their hose line before they go through the door. People are not doing door procedure correctly. They're not getting down below the neutral plane. We can capture all of that. So I think those traditional firefighters that might have 20 plus years in would benefit immensely from being allowed to recognize those kind of traits that they may have picked up along the way, and the organization learn very, very quickly from that also.
I think I've just written down two words here: consistent, standardized. As you know, trainers deliver things in different ways. The trainers could have both been given exactly the same input, but the way they deliver that to the next person can be hugely different. And having the ability to be able, as an organization, to evidence consistent and standardized training ensures that gives them the protection they need. James, I'm coming to you now to give us summing up what you heard and something that you want to leave the listeners with.
Duncan, and I guess, you summed that up perfectly when we talk about standardised and consistent, and that's certainly something that we're really, really focusing on at the moment. We started off with a training ground effectively, and listening to our feedback from our partners, it's really about how do we deliver the best training with the least amount of friction possible. And part of that is us going back through our learning guides and spending a lot of time on our learning content that supports the trainer, assessor, facilitator to deliver the best training outcomes possible. Now, there will always be localization required for this, but we're providing a lot of content now to organizations that are using our technology to enable them to get some quick wins by adopting this. So we're talking about trainer facilitator guides for specific environments and training environments. And I think that's going to continue. So we really want to create this community of really best practice in immersive training to get people from around the world to help each other. Funnily enough, one of the interesting things of parts of my job is being able to travel around the world, and Ted and Evan are doing the same thing. Funnily enough, we see the same thing at nearly every fire service that we go to. We all have the same challenges in training, in retention of firefighters, in recruitment of firefighters. So we see this technology as an enabler, We want people to understand at all the different levels how this technology can be used. And we want people to give it a go. Really, it's been interesting along the journey to see some of the detractors of this technology. We want to work with those people, and we want to take the experts from around the world, distill their knowledge, and put it in a platform that can be shared globally. And I think that's really our why.
Well, gentlemen, it's been absolutely inspiring for me to hear the passion from all three of you to the products that are now finding their place within fire and rescue services. And I would urge listeners to go to the FLAIM website, because the amount of information in there is quite staggering. The case studies are excellent. I've just learned that the Memphis Fire Department are proud users of the FLAIM system, amongst others. So we get the opportunity to see you at shows around the world. Ted, where's the next show that people can come and see you at?
So for Trainer, Duncan, I'm very busy. I've got a very full calendar of visiting most fire and rescue services up and down the UK, working very closely with most of the metropolitan services. And it's another one of those journeys where they're very impressed with the products. It's just taking a little bit of time for people to go through the procurement process. As we know, it's always a lengthy process. So the Emergency Services Show will be our next big show and tell of our advancement of Trainer in the UK, and we'll also be doing supporting some other shows with our other product, which is Flame Extinguisher for the work safety audience also.
No, I was just going to say a few other spots that we'll be at before the end of the year and then into the next year is, IITSIC, which unless you Google it, I'm going to struggle to tell you what the acronym is short for. But it's basically one of the largest modeling, simulation, and training shows, and it's mostly military focused. So we'll be there next week. So that'll be November 27th, kind of through the December 1st. But that will be, again, working with some of the Navy and Air Force customers that we've been lucky enough to have over the last few years. But then also Technology Summit International. That's in Irving, Texas. That was a great one that brings a lot of the new tech and some of the traditional, booths that you would normally see to a conference that's dedicated to up-and-coming technology. So I do think that some of the avoidance of progress, I think it's just going away as more and more leaders take their positions and they realize that technology is out there to help, not just to change the way that things have been done. It's like, hey, how can I do my job better? Because so many of us have not enough time and not enough resources to do it. So we're using technology to be more effective with our training. So those are just a couple before the end of the year, Duncan. So.
Excellent. Thanks for that. I'm Duncan White. This has been a podcast with FLAIM for leaders in fire and safety. And gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing one and all of you sometime very soon in person. Until such times, take safe. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you, Duncan.